I want to go back before we begin to go forward and study the new stuff for today. I want to go back and study the last three slides, okay? Because I think we're going to notice some tendencies on those three slides. So there's 1, 2, 3 slides back. And let's put all of the values in and draw the graph itself. That's what I'm interested in. And I want to notice two things. First, I want to notice what happens when the x is 0. Now, when the x is 0, that's on the vertical line here. And you'll notice that it says 2 here, and when x is 0, it's 2. So whatever the value is when x is 0, that's where it crosses the y-axis. So that's worth keeping in mind. It crosses the y-axis. The other thing I want you to notice is that the y's are going down by 2's. Down by 2, down by 2, down by 2, down by 2. And the x's are going over by 1. So look at this. The y's are going down by 2, over 1, down by 2, over 1, down by 2, over 1, down by 2, over 1. So I just wanted to make that observation that we can notice those tendencies, and also notice that in the equation there's a -2, kind of like down 2, and then there's a +2, which was kind of like where we touched with 0. All right, well, let's see what the next slide looks at. All right, so I'm going to put a bunch of values in there and plot those points. Let's check this out now. Let's look at that 0 thing again. The 0 paired with a 3, and look, there's that 0, 3 again. So it touches the y-axis at 3, and there's a 3 in the equation. All right, that's worth noticing. And then negative, well, you know, if generally speaking in the world, positive means up, negative means down, and it's negative or down 1/2. And if you look, the y's are going down by 1's, and the x's are going up by 2's. So down 1, x is 2. Look at the graph here. Down 1, x over 2, down 1, x over 2, down. That's interesting. And there's that -1/2. And that's kind of reflected in how we're moving on the graph. And 3 is where it crosses the y-axis, and that's kind of reflected too in the graph. All right, so that's worth noticing. Oh, well, this one's nuts, because you got to get that y equals thing going on there first. So first I do all of my work to make it say y equals. And then I fill in my values. And now let's check it out. Now let's plot the points, okay? So let's look at the derived equation, this y equals 3/2 x minus 1. Look at, here we are, -1, and hey, look, this seems to be a pattern here that we're touching the y-axis every time at -1. And the equation has a -1 in it. And also the -1 pairs up with 0. Oh, that's interesting. And then if you look, this in front of the x, this whole thing is 3, 2. Well, look at how we're moving here. We're kind of going up 3 over 2, up 3 over 2, up 3 over 2. And look at here. I know these are negative numbers, but we're going up 3. We're going from -7 to -4 to -1 to 2 to 5. So we're going up by 3 all the time, but the x's are going up by 2's, right? So that's interesting. The y's go up by 3 and the x goes up by 2. And it's also pictured in the graph. So by taking the time to go back and look at those slides, I think I found a pattern. And maybe that pattern can be a lot quicker to graph than the graphing that we did before. We had to build up a table and everything else. So let's kind of formalize everything that we're starting to work on here. See, in this equation, y equals mx plus b is a very important equation. That's called the general equation of a line. And m stands for what we call the slope. Now, if I was in class, I would be sitting there going, why did they choose an m for slope? It doesn't make any sense. Well, but it's how you move, okay? So it does make sense. And b is the y-intercept, or where it touches the y-axis, and that's kind of where you begin. So let's show you what I mean here. If we look at y equals 2x minus 3, The 2 is in the M move slope place, okay? So the slope is 2 over 1, and the y-intercept is -3. So we use a B because it's where you begin. So I go on the y-axis, there's my y. I go down until I hit -3, and I make a dot. And then I move up 2 over 1. So I'm going to go up 2 places over 1. Then I'm going to do it again, up 2 over 1. Then I'm going to do it again, up 2 over 1. And one more time, I'm going to go up 2 over 1. And then, just like before, I connect the dot. And voila, my graph is drawn. So it's a whole lot easier than actually making out a table. In other words, I can look at the equation, figure out the slope and the y-intercept, and once I do that, I can draw it really quickly on the graph. I can touch at -3, I can begin there, always on the y-axis, and then I go up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. And then I do connect the dot, okay? Let's try another one. This time y equals 3x minus 4. And remember, of course, that we use M for slope, and it's how you move. B is the y-intercept, it's where you begin. And now I know by looking at this equation that the slope is 3 over 1. Now the number 3, if I wrote it as a fraction, would be 3 over 1. That's why we put over 1 there. And the y-intercept is -4. Be very careful to peek in front of the 4 to see if it's positive or negative. So I begin by touching at -4. So I go down the y-axis to -4 and I touch. Bingo. And then I go up 3, 1, 2, 3, over 1. 1, 2, 3, over 1. 1, 2, 3, over 1. And now I connect the dot. And voila, I got my graph drawn. So that's really powerful and really cool. Okay? Here's the next one. You try this one without me. It's a little tricky. I gave you the y-intercept there, so it's not so tricky. But you begin, graph it on your own, do stop and start, and then I'll show you the correct answer. Go ahead. Okay, so slope and move, y-intercept, and where you begin. And in this problem, since b is 0, we begin at 0. Touch right there. Now I'm going to go up 1 over 3. Now, with a slope, we always go left to right. What did I just say? Always go left to right. Up 1 over 3. Up 1 over 3. Now, I can also fill in the backside doing this by just extending that line. So if I go up 1 and over 3 to the right, I could go down 1 over 3 to the left. And then same thing, down 1 over 3 more to the left. And I can just sit there and connect the dot, and there's my line drawn for me. Isn't this so much easier than going through all the trouble of writing up a table and filling in the domain elements and looking them all up? I think it is. It's a very quick, very effective way to graph. Okay, here's another one to try without me. Let's do stop and start. Go ahead. Okay, so again, y equals mx plus b. M is the slope, it's how you move. B is the y-intercept, it's where you begin. The slope can always be found in front of the x, the b can always be found at the end. So the slope is what's in front of the x, it's 2/3. The y-intercept is what's at the end, it's 1. Where do I begin? Do I begin at 2/3 or do I begin at 1? I begin at 1 because that's what the B is for, begin. So I go in at 1 and I make a mark, 1 on the y-axis, not on the x-axis. One of the common mistakes you see people make is to put it on the x-axis. And to be honest, alphabetically, x comes before y in almost everything you've done your whole life. So it's kind of strange that the y goes first, but you have to discipline yourself to recognize that. It's called the y-intercept. So you have to touch the y-axis. Then I'm going to go up 2 over 3. Up 2 over 3. So there's my first one, up 2 over 3. Now I go up 2 more, over 3 more. And because I really want to fill out the whole graph, I'm going to extend it to the back side. I'm going to go down 2 over 3, down 2 over 3. Connect the dot, and there's my graph. Okay? All right. So we're looking pretty good with that. Now, Let's see, you tried this one. The big difference is now you get a negative 2/3 slope. Remember, negative means go down, and we always go left to right. With those hints and that sense of direction, on you. Go ahead, stop and start. Okay, so slope, move, y-intercept, begin. Where do I begin? I begin at 1. But this time, because the slope is negative 2/3, I'm going to go down 2 over 3. Down 2 over 3. I want to fill in the graph, so now I'm just going to go up 2, but then 3 to the left. So I extend the same line. If for any reason your points are not in a perfectly straight line, you did something wrong. They need to be in a straight line. Okay? And I connect a dot, and there's my beautiful graph all put in place. Any questions? All right. So let's try the next one. Go ahead. Okay, so you've gotten done with it. Again, we're slope. It's how you move. Y-intercept, and it's where you begin. So my slope is always found in front of x, so it's negative 3/2. And the y-intercept is the number at the end, the constant all by itself, and that is 3. So I begin, remember it's on the y-axis, not the x-axis, so I begin at 3 on the y-axis. Now I'm going to move always left to right, and negative means go down. So I'm going to go down 3 over 2. Down 3 over 2. Down 3 over 2. Filling in the backside, I'll go this way. Up 3, but to the left 2. And connect the dot. If for any reason those points are not all in a straight line, check your work. They will always be in a straight line with a linear equation. Okay, another stop and start guy. Got 2 more after this one. This is y equals negative 2x plus 3. And you guys do stop and start. I'm going to put in the slope and the move and the y-intercept and the begin. Now, you're on your own. Go ahead. We'll go over it in a minute or so. Okay, so the big difference between this and a number of other questions is I want to get back to and emphasize that when you see a whole number in front of the x, like negative 2, it's really negative 2 over 1. Okay, because a whole number is over 1 if we write it as a fraction. So I begin at 3, just like the previous problem, but now I'm going to go down 2 over 1. It's very important that you go over 1. If you don't write this as a fraction and the over 1, and you just go down 2 straight, you won't graph the right line. It's got to go down 2 and over 1. Down 2 over 1. Down 2 over 1. Down 2 over 1. Connect the dot. There's my graph. Okay? All right. Next one's up. Little tricky here. You got to ask yourself what number's in front of that x. The number in front of the x is a 1. We don't bother writing it, but it's there. And then if I express that as a fraction, it's 1 over 1. So while you graph it, I'm just going to fill in the parts that we're pretty familiar with by now. Okay, now in this case, for the first time, in addition to it's the first time with a slope of positive 1, which you need to know or recognize as 1 over 1, the y-intercept is a negative. You got to peek in front of that 4. That's a negative 4. So I'm going to begin at negative 4. And then I'm going to go up 1 over 1 on my slope. Up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, and up 1 over 1. And then I connect the dot, and there's my line graphed. Okay? So again, this is a much quicker, much more effective way to graph a line than to use a table of values. Okay, so next up, y equals negative x. Now the number in front of the x is a 1, so this time it's negative also. So it's going to be negative 1 over 1, which means down 1 over 1, and the y-intercept is 0 because there's nothing after the x. So you might as well write plus 0 because plus 0 has the same value. So I will fill these in as you complete the graph, and then I'll go over it with you. This is the last one for this particular video. Okay, there's my y-intercept of 0. Now I'm going to go down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1, and again, connect the dot, and there's my beautiful line. Okay, so that is graphing using y equals mx plus b.